Hello, Shirimans and Sand People. My name is TV's Guy, and hey, new animated short to promote the launch of the Rise of the Ascended expansion for Legends of Runeterra, and that means a new animated short specifically from the studio Unit Image, or Image, depending on how French you want to pronounce their particular name. They are the same people who are responsible for the intro cinematic to Legends of Runeterra itself, or rather the launch cinematic with Darius and the two Piltover kids fighting against Zed and the Shadow Isles creatures, as well as the short for the Targon expansion that was just absolutely gorgeous, featured Leona and Diana having an epic fight scene. So that's wonderful. And you know what that means? That means we're going to spend, an hour and a half, 2 hours, we'll see, we'll play it by ear, just talking about these 3 minutes of animation. But fun fact, actually, did you know this? You can actually make content on YouTube that is less than an hour long. It came as a surprise to me, but apparently it has a feature called Shorts, where you can make videos that are not long, and blows my mind, but I made a channel for it, so you can subscribe to that one over there. But I just make quick hot takes about things. If you're interested in it, if you're not, stick around here because we've got some animation to get through. And the lovely thing about the Unit Image shorts is that they have this gorgeous painterly style that mixes a lot of media. Because, you have, obviously, this is 3D animation. These are 3D models moving around on screen. But there's a lot of 2D animation and 2D animation effects and effects taken from traditional animation mixed in there, which is something I love to see. I love mixed media animation. It's just, it's the absolute best. And we've got a veritable plethora of that stuff to talk about here. But one of the things I want to pay attention to in this thing as well, and do roast me in the comments if I forget, I want to pay attention to the lighting and the use of color grading, because there's a few little interesting things going on there with light especially. So anyway, plot of this thing, we're in Shurima, and this guy has stolen a thing from some Renekton worshippers, and Renekton is like, no, I want this damn thing back, and then he falls into Nasus's library somehow, because, conveniently located pretty close to where Renekton lives, I guess. And Nasus is like, I shall take that thing from you and probably take it to Azir, because he is friendly with Azir. Just want to make that clear. Nasus isn't acting as an enemy here, even though he's being maybe a little bit of a dick to the guy by casting Wither on him, it looks like. But he's picking up the thing, presumably to take it to Azir. But since Renekton decides to gate crash the whole thing, he lets the two Ascended fight and picks it up himself, takes it to Azir, and then we get a lovely scene of Azir basically rebuilding his empire, which gives us a little bit of lore progression from where we had left off with that, because the last time we sort of saw Azir, at least in his own story, there was Shurima had there's rumors that the Empire has risen, but nothing really specific has been happening yet. At this point, though, when we meet him again, things have clearly progressed a little bit further than mere rumors. He has rebuilt the Sun Disk, he's rebuilding his empire, and here we get to see why it was apparently so important that he got this lost sigil thing, magic item. He doesn't seem to use it to do anything except just kind of hold it in his hand, but what it allows him to do is that it allows him to use the Sun Disk, apparently it seems anyway, use the Sun Disk to bring water. And this, by the way, in the lore and the politics of Shurima, is the source of Azir's power as Emperor. This is why people follow around the Ascended. This is why he gets to be Bird God Emperor of Shurima, is because he has the power to use the Sun Disk to bring water to the desert. That's kind of an important part. That's part of why, at least within the lore of League of Legends, that Xerath would not make a good emperor, because he can't do the thing that brings the water. Should really make a politics of Shurima video someday, but that's not the one we're making right now. But that's the essential story of the thing. If you want more detail about it, Necrit has a full breakdown of all the lore implications and all the little details and stuff about this thing. As for me, I'm more interested just in the animation. So let's start this thing over from the beginning and get into it. So we might as well start with, you all know. Boom, foot hits the ground. Guess what those dust clouds are? That's right, my friends, they're hand animated. These are bits of 2D animation, animated on 2s, and the way that you can tell it's animated on 2s is that this video runs at, actually, let me check, I can just check. It runs at 30 frames per second. I think it's probably animated at, I think it's probably rendered out originally at 24 frames per second, but then they put it on YouTube, and then YouTube says, oh, this should run at 30 frames per second, and then so what happens sometimes is that there's an extra frame duplicated in there to make the thing feel, anyway, it runs at a certain frame rate. And when something moves on every frame of a piece of animation like this, like every time I move forward one frame in the animation, something happens. That is, in animation terms, called being animated on ones. That's like every one frame, there is a piece of animation that makes the thing move. On the other hand, if the thing only moves on every other frame, that's called animating on twos. As you can see here, for example, you can see that the camera moves, that the guy's foot and shadow disappears, but all the dust clouds are not doing anything. They are just hanging static in the air, and then on the next frame they move, and then they don't move, and then they move, and then they don't move, and then they move, and then they don't move. That's animating on twos, and most Disney movies that you'll have seen in your life, like when they're animated at their smoothest, they're usually running on twos. Variable frame rate, though, is something that's very common in animation, where sometimes you'll animate a thing maybe on 3s or 4s if it's really not that important that it's moving around smoothly, if it's a background object or whatever. You can just, like, don't need to spend 1 million man-hours animating that same thing super smoothly, whatever. Background characters in anime, for example, will typically be animated, like, on practically no frames. It's like sometimes they're just static images. Like, it's just a cost resource-saving thing in traditional animation. But animating things on twos is not something that's really necessary to do, for example, in 3D animation, because you can just tell the computer to make more frames happen. That's an oversimplification, but broadly speaking, there's less of a budgetary constraint when it comes to 3D animation in terms of frame rate. But sometimes, and certainly League of Legends has been doing this a lot, they will sort of they will sort of pretend that they're animating something on twos or animating it at lower frame rates than strictly necessary in order to achieve a certain aesthetic. And we can see that here in this shot as the dude is running out of the mouth of the crocodile temple. Gee, I wonder who lives here. That, for example, here, we can see that the camera is moving, which means that the scene is animating and things happening. We can see that his hair is doing a little bit of a thing, but he himself just kind of hangs in the air without moving. And that's like, there's little moments like that, sometimes like this, for example, where the animators just make the decision that, yeah, we'll just for a second, we'll animate this movement will animate on twos, this movement will animate at a slightly lower frame rate in order to achieve a certain aesthetic of movement. Because our eyes, even though we don't necessarily consciously perceive those kinds of like frame rate dips, like those kind of frame rate changes, they do change the aesthetic of movement that the character has. And in this case, at least that's my estimation, is being used to work with the painterly aesthetic of the whole thing. Like, this whole thing looks like a moving painting a lot of the time. Like, you stop this thing and it kind of looks like a 2D illustration, right? So that limited frame rate is, at least in my estimation, used to heighten that aesthetic, to give it more a feeling of being like a cartoon, like something that is hand animated, like something that looks like the way that we've been trained in our brains to understand that animation works. Like, we know what animation looks like, and when something moves with the same kind of aesthetic, that can kind of heighten the feeling of the thing. They've done it many times before, and it works really well, and I really like the way that it looks. But that's just something I really like about the modern approaches that we have to animation, is that we're not really locked into, oh, we shall animate everything on the specific frame rate of the thing. Like, we don't have to stick to like animated things on 2s or 3s or whatever. We don't have to stick to using 3D animation to animate only at 60 frames per second because gamer. We can actually just mess around with it and do whatever the hell we want in order to achieve an aesthetic that is interesting or complements the story that we're trying to tell with the animation that we have. And I absolutely love that. Anyway, back to the actual animation of the darn thing, which I'm supposed to be talking about. So, like I said, mixed media all over the place, and you can especially see that in movement frames like this one. So pay attention to this, for example. Right here, the guy's legs, like as he's running, as he's moving fast, we have this smearing going on, which again, in like 2D artwork, when you want to create the look of a character who's moving fast, you smear the character out like that. You create little speed lines around their movement, but of course, not 2D animated. Like, it's a technique that you use in 2D animation to approximate the feeling of speed in a static image. Theoretically, not really necessary when you have an image that's actually moving, but here it's being used again to heighten the aesthetic of being quite painterly, but also to actually add that sense of speed, like putting those effects, those ideas from static illustration into work in 3D images like this can actually help heighten the sense of speed and really heighten like the sense of momentum and movement that's going on with the character. You can see it again here as he leaps off the ground. There's these little trailing smears of motion that follow him along as he's going. And here again, you can see they're using an animated on twos kind of aesthetic with the character where, like, even though he is moving in the image, even though the scene is progressing, you can see that the character model remains completely static. Like, he doesn't change his pose, he doesn't change his movement, even though, of course, in real life, your body would always be doing something, like you would always be having some kind of motion. You wouldn't just be copy-pasted from one frame to the next this way. But again, it's all about heightening the aesthetic. And here they're using more traditional film technique, which is in order to heighten the sense of speed and movement that's going on here. All this blur that's right here, that's been added. That's something like the director has made a decision about. We want this scene to be really blurry and kind of indistinct because it's like a moment of speed, movement, and confusion, and then we get to finally see the blur fault. So why? He grabs onto the thing, we're stabilized, and his sail unfurls. And by the way, his big-ass sail, this thing right here, you guessed it. First of all, it just kind of pops into existence. Like, it just, all of a sudden, it just exists. Like, poof, there it is. But it is 2D animation. It is like the little ropes or whatever are holding onto it are 2D animated, and the shape itself, at least as far as I can tell, if it's not 2D animated, it's a damn impressive piece of like 3D animation approximating 2D. But as far as I can tell, this thing is 2D animated as it unfurls in front of him and folds out. Maybe, maybe there's a model swap. Like, I think maybe somewhere around maybe here, they might be swapping in a 3D model or painting over it. Could be. It's really hard to tell, and that's, again, part of it, because it's definitely a 3D model by this point, I think. But that's something that's really impressive about this mixed media use of mixed aesthetics, is that they can blend things together and obtain, like, from 3D animation, they can obtain that perfect model consistency where, like, from frame to frame, a 3D model will always look exactly the same as it's supposed to, unless you tell it to change. Whereas with hand-drawn animation, keeping things on model can actually be kind of difficult, especially with weirdly complex, amorphous subjects, like this giant ball of cloth that is unfolding in front of him like some kind of perverse jellyfish. So having a 3D model of the sailcloth, which probably swaps in, like, I think it's here. Like, I think it's here that we see the swap from something painted to something to something which is actually a 3D model. You take a look at the tassels, especially. Actually, I can zoom in on those. That's a power I have because I have editing software that I'm using to do this. Look at the tassels here. Compare that to the tassels we see here, like these little indistinct sort of painterly blobs. And then they show up here, and it's like, oh no, these are very distinct 3D looking objects. I would take a guess that this is where the swap happens, but honestly, don't hold me to that because I cannot be 100% sure. Right, moving on. So, once again, appropriating the aesthetics of 2D animation to grant a greater sense of speed to 3D animation. These speed lines, all this stuff that streaks past him right here, it's something that you'll see in any anime. Like, when you want a relatively static image to look like it's moving fast, well, give it a background that's all smeared out and full of speed lines moving in a particular direction. So here, that's being used to heighten the sense of, like, downwards, forwards momentum that he's got going on. And here you can also really clearly see the animated on twos aesthetic that they're going for with his movement. And by having these different frame rates where the background is moving on ones, like the background is moving on every single frame, so that feels like it moves very quickly and very smoothly, but he's moving on twos, you get a feeling like that. Like, you get a certain feeling of a certain aesthetic of movement that I just find really compelling and really nice. Like, I really like the way that they put this together. And then, once again, as he lands in the sand, of course, hand-animated sand cloud! Whee! And as he's kicking up sand as he's going along, as far as I can tell anyway, again, maybe they have like a 3D generation engine that just generates these flat two-dimensional shapes in the way that they, like, maybe they have that. I'm not that familiar with the technology, but if they do, damn impressive work. And here, again, the aesthetic of being painterly, the aesthetic of being an illustration, what we have here is actually a clean 3D model. Like, the 3D model itself is not made out of these smears. If you rotated it in 3D space, those smears wouldn't be, like, part of the model. They are painted on top of it. Again, some of this can probably be achieved with filters. Some of this can probably be generated with AI at this point. I'm not sure that they do. That, from my perspective, that would be very difficult to tell. But the effect of it is, you get this incredibly smeared sort of painting aesthetic that really just heightens the sense of being blurred and speedy. And again, you could just add a camera effect. Like, you could just add motion blur as a camera effect. This is something like 3D software has been able to do for years and years, what emulates the way that motion blurs when it's filmed by an actual film camera. But instead of doing that, you can see there is no blur. Like, the 3D model is completely clear underneath the smears. We're using the smears to generate a fake blur that gives you that sense, that aesthetic. And I just love, like, look at the colors, the way they're all blending together. We have this bright golden of, like, the desert sands and the bright white of the Cape mixing in with it, giving, like, these are just gorgeous frames all on their own, frankly. And then, zoop, the background just kind of pops into view as the camera slows down, pans away, and off our friend goes on his little adventure. And then we get our first antagonist of the thing, which is the very fast crocodile boy and his angry rider. And again, like, just look at the way they use the smearing. Look at the way they use this painter aesthetic, because the background too, like the background environment, as far as I can tell from the camera movement, most of this background environment is 3D rendered. I would imagine probably the backgrounds of matte paintings, but because they're overlaying it with so much specific blurring, so many brush strokes, you really do get a sense of, like, this guy is flying through like a Renaissance era painting. And here again, you can really see that animated on 2's aesthetic that they're going for, where you can see certain parts of the character model animate all the time. Like, for example, his cape, which is moving in the wind, is moving on every single frame, but the rest of his body isn't. And this variable frame rate is something that you'll see in 2D animation as well. Like, when you have a character who is standing in the wind, and the wind is whipping through their hair, the animator might create a cycle of the hair blowing in the wind that's moving on ones that, like, looks incredibly smooth. But then once the character actually starts to move themselves, they're like, their body movement, their hand movements, their facial animation, that might be animated on 2s or 3s, but you still get, like, because part of the character is animated on 1s, you still get this gorgeous sense of greater movement happening, and that's kind of the same technique that they're using here. Where, like, the cape kind of keeps the character alive between still frames. Like, you can see the wind is still blowing through the thing, and it gives him this, like, excellent sense of life. And I love the expressiveness of this guy, by the way. He's so charming, isn't he? Like, just like the instant you see, oh man, look at that handsome rogue. Look at how fun he is. By the way, anyway, the light. Yes, I was supposed to talk about the light. I wanted to talk about the lighting. Pay attention to the color grade here. The color grade as we open is brown and yellow. Like, it's yellow and brown, brown and yellow. It's the traditional colors of, like, a desert scene. Like, just yellow, brown, brown, yellow, brown, yellow. That's all over the place. All of the light is very sort of yellowish, a little bit pale, but mostly yellowish. And there aren't, despite the way that the scene looks, there aren't really very many saturated colors here. Most of the colors here are relatively desaturated, which means, like unlike the sailcloth here, which is one of the only saturated things in the scene, where you have, like, this really bright, vibrant, popping red, most of the background colors, like, it's, like, mostly desaturated browns, grays, and yellows that dominate the scene. Pay attention to that and keep it in mind, because it's going to come up as a thing later. I just wanted to bring it up. Anyway, here we have the MacGuffin. It's MacGuffin because it's an object of some, we don't know what, like, the object itself isn't really important to the scene. It's just the motivating incident for the thing. Like, he wants the damn thing, which is why he went and stole it, and the guy who's chasing him on Crocodile wants it back, which is why, like, that chase is happening. Renekton wants it back, which is why he attacks him, and Nasus wants it for Azir, which is why Nasus shows up, and then eventually he takes it and gives it to Azir, and Azir wants it. Like, it's just a thing that drives the plot forward. That's why it's a MacGuffin. And that's why there isn't time spent, like, really sort of, oh, this is the ancient magical artifact of such and so, and it does the thing, and here is its history, and here is how how important the thing. Like, they don't bother really explaining what the thing is. All we need to know is, like, here's a magic thing. People want it because, I don't know, reasons, and that's why the action is happening. Very efficient storytelling, very classic storytelling, too. And another thing I wanted to point out about the light, the texture on this guy's hair, especially his beard, is really, really nice. Like, let's really zoom in again since we can. And, like, the texture on this guy's beard is actually really impressive, because that's something that's kind of deceptively hard to get right a lot of the time. Hair in general is, like, a difficult thing in animation. It takes a lot of work to animate hair moving. It takes a lot of work, like, to get hair strands to look, like, moderately reasonable on a character's head. But hair texture is also something that's really difficult to get right. Like, mostly when you're dealing with, like, a classic, like, if they have, like, smooth, straight hair, relatively simple for like a computer to handle. But there has been difficulty over the course of history of animation rendering curly hair, more naturalistic hair, and especially the hair of people of color has been difficult for 3D animation, also because they haven't been prioritizing it, but also because it has a different texture. It reacts to light differently. It's not just about getting each individual hair strand to be correct or put in the correct position. It's also about making sure that the way the light interacts with it, the way that it's textured, the way that it casts shadows upon itself, and the way that it reflects things, and the way that it's translucent. All of those things are parts of what makes hair in general, and especially like very heavily textured hair, oftentimes really difficult to get right in animation. So I just wanted to point out that this is really nice. Like, this is really nicely done. It has a really nice texture, and I think at least that it looks really good. So it's just wanted to call out that, hey, good job on that, because I've seen people not do a very good job of it. Anyway, more hand-animated dust clouds. And the clever thing about those little dust clouds, by the way, is that you get the sense, like, as the crocodile bursts through here, you get the sense that it's basically bursting through this rock formation, right? Like, it's just smashing it to pieces. But it's really not. It's just a big dust cloud that kind of just conceals how does the crocodile get over or through it. There's this big dust cloud, don't worry about it. Just a clever little way, because then all you need to do afterwards is, like, you don't need to actually animate the shattering of the rock itself. You can just, like, oh, dust cloud, and then some debris falls down, and then we kind of just assume that the thing got smashed, but we don't actually need to see the mechanics of it, so you save a little bit of time on the animation there. And again, hella animated on 2's aesthetic going on here, which I appreciate a lot, and I really like the way that this crocodile is designed. Also Renekton, like, once he shows up, ooh, gorgeous character model that this guy's gotten for this thing. Because, like, look at this, and look at this angry fool. I do like the head paint, like that. It kind of looks like a crocodile's bite, almost as though he's been bitten on the head.
Was that the bite of 87?
I think it's quite clever, and also it's very iconic. Like, it's very distinct. It gives him this kind of Darth Maul vibe, a little bit, like with the crown of horns, but reversed. It makes him a very distinct character. Like, you can tell, like, you don't need him to have, like, an evil expression to know that this guy is probably an antagonist, because he just kind of looks like an antagonist. It's good character design, basically. And he's like, oh, he can ride a crocodile. Well, that's not good. Again, the expressiveness of this guy's face is really good, which is something I really appreciated about the other shorts from Uniimage, or Unit Image. I should really figure out how exactly to pronounce that. That they have really strong character design. Like, you really get a sense of these characters are individual people. Like, there's a history, there's a character, there's a personality there, which is something I just appreciate a lot. And again, the smearing being used here to really create the movement aesthetic for the crocodile. And here you can see they're doing the selective thing, where sometimes the crocodile is moving on every frame, like he's animated on ones. Then sometimes, as we get around here, animated on 2's. Depending on how smooth you want the motion to be, you just kind of vary the frame rate. And frankly, they could probably go down to animating on 3's every once in a while, if they wanted to. And I really like the swoop. Like the way that the crocodile, he comes in from the left, zoom, and then he kind of makes this curving, like, you can see how the tail is being used to emphasize the curvature of his movement, like really giving this S-curve, so this sort of smooth skitter. So you really get the sense that he's, like, chasing him with a lot of speed, and it's like he's almost drifting, right? Like, it's like Tokyo drifting his crocodile there, like, wapam, and then skidding across, and then kind of regaining control from the understeer, and then chasing him down over the side of the hill. It's a really nice animalistic movement pattern, and I really like it. I also like the dive, like as the crocodile comes to the lip of this hill here, and instead of running down, it just goes whoop-de-doo, it just kind of slides down on its stomach, which is a lovely little detail that I appreciate a lot. And then we get the shot here of the whip. Okay, so the whip, Animation here is just excellent. Like, look at this. And look at what happens when he actually, when he swings it to actually break the guy's glider. Do you see that? Do you see that camera effect? This is, again, the power of having 3D animation at your disposal for something that looks like 2D animation, is that you can do a rack zoom, or a dolly zoom, that's what they're called, where you mess with, like, the depth of field, and you get this gorgeous, like, sort of zoom-in power effect. It kind of feels anime-ish, almost, in the way that it, like, the whole world kind of distorts around this guy's action, as, like, you can see, like, the background falls away and we get this big zoom in and his head becomes huge in the frame, and then we follow this line down to the whip itself, and then as the hand swings, the whip, woof, becomes super over-exaggerated in the frame as it streaks across. And is it 2D animated here? Surely not. I'm actually not sure. Actually here... Like, I know it's a 3D object here. I'm almost 100% sure, but here as we transition, I think actually in this entire shot, that whip might be 2D, and it might be. It might just be that they're doing really well with the filter effects over top of it. It's kind of frustrating that I can't tell. But I think the whip here is actually 2D animated. Which is cool as balls! And again, same, like, hyper-distortion effect. You can see we have the anime speed lines all over this thing, actually. Hyper-distortion effect. You can also see that the background is gone. Because this is, like, the big important, like, this is the swing of, like, he's gonna hit him, and he's gonna do some damage, and it's gonna be bad for him. So this is a big important moment in the storytelling of the animation. So everything, we get this weird push-in zoom, and we get, like, everything else falls away, and as the whip smacks across the screen, the very background itself is obliterated in favor of this white void. Well, bluish white, rather. And then we see the whip, which might be 2D animated. That is so fucking cool! As, like, Castlevania levels of it. I think it is! And what? Pow! And here we get the first of the big flash frames, and there's lots of these flash frames in this thing, which again is a technique straight out of 2D animation. Like, this is not something you typically see in filmmaking or even 3D animation. Use of flash frames like these ones to emphasize the power and importance of a moment, like that. So you get the flash frame, which transitions us from this, like, this, you can see there's a little bit of sky, maybe there's a little bit of cloud sort of hanging out. Like, the flash frame transitions us from that into, boom, this super extremely backlit moment where everything just becomes a silhouette as the whip streaks out of view, and we see that, like, the glider thing, or whatever, has been broken, and this is like this big, oh, this is the big, oh shit moment where, like, now the guy's in trouble, now he has to think on his feet, now there's drama, like, how's he gonna do, what's he gonna do to escape, his glider is broken, that was the only thing he had. And so, boom, down we go. Anyway, another little thing, straight out of anime, we get this glint, and notice how the glint of the glider comes first, right? And then the glider comes into view, and then he falls down. But notice how the glint is teased before this thing is gone, which spatially makes no sense at all, because here we're close up on him, and now all of a sudden he's, like, way back in the frame. But that's a really good way to transition from one shot to the other in a kind of natural way. In a way that, like, the first times, a couple of times I watched this thing, I didn't even notice that we had this little tease of the cut before the cut actually happens. It just looks so smooth. You get this wonderfully smooth transition from this super close-up shot to this super far-away shot, and you barely even notice that it's happening. And wabba-boom. So, some of this dust, at least, I would imagine is probably 3D generated, or... No? No, that's 2D as well. Okay, so I think the dust effects, like these dust effects, like the dusty overlay filter that we've got going on here, that's probably added in the 3D animation software, but the dust clouds themselves, I think, are 2D animated. Which, again, like I'm so uncertain about where things switch from one thing to another, because they are so damn good at masking those transitions, so that whenever they want to, they can just use, oh, this shot would look stronger with 2D animation, we'll just do 2D animation. This shot would look stronger with 3D animation, we'll just do 3D animation. It's so good. I love it. And then we get the setup, right? We get the setup of the guy is like, oh, well, I have two halves of the thing left. What am I going to do with those? Then we get this little, this little zoom in sort of saying, aha, here's the thing. And it's like, and then, like, I love the transition where we get, like, this narrow slit in the wall, right, with the light coming through. And then we get the cut to him. And here he's fully lit, right? Like he's just out in the sunlight, but as he gets the idea, as he realizes, oh, I can use the thing that I have in my hands with the thing that's coming up in front of me, the idea literally lights up his face, right? You see that? Like how, like, oh, so you know that he's looking at that thing, and that's the thing that's inspiring him to do a thing or have an idea or think of some way to get out of the situation. And so, webpam. And again, flash frames. Not quite as like it's not a full flash frame. It's not the entire screen being flashed up and turning black and white for a second, but you still get these like uses of 2D animated, like really sort of anime style flashes to emphasize the thing that he does, like this shockwave that propagates away from the thing as he jams it into the wall, that really gives a sense of power and a sense of importance, like zing, zing, like those look like ka-chunk, ka-chunk, like powerful strikes rather than just cook. Like I don't know how to explain that with words. I'm using sounds instead, and that works really well. And whoop-de-doo! And again, he's such a charmer. Like, you just get this Indiana Jones adventurer vibe from him. He's cool. Like, you want to, like, this is a cool character that you want to get to know. And he hasn't said a word. That's the thing I love about character animation, is that you can get a character where it's like, oh man, that guy is so cool. I want to hang out with him. I want to see what he does. Even though the guy has never spoken a single word. And he never will throughout the entire short. You just get the sense that this guy would be fun, like, to see what he gets up to. Anyway, lighting, once again, notice the change in the light as we transition away from the desert immediately adjacent to Renekton's temple into this bit of desert with these giant, I guess they're salt pillars or something along those lines. The light changes a little bit. Like, mostly the color grading here is still like lots of yellow, lots of browns, lots of grays, but it gets way paler. Like, just even the light of the sky itself gets really, really white, really, really pale. So there's this subtle transition away from the color grade that dominated the area around Renekton's temple, which tells us, okay, we have left the area around Renekton's temple, this area of danger, and we've traveled into these new areas. Like, when he comes out, and he's streaking across the landscape, like he's shaken off his pursuer, and he's had this little victory. Like, we've had the first emotional climax of the thing was like, okay, we got away from the thing. All of a sudden, all that sandy dustiness, like all that, like that sandy haze that kind of dominates the landscape around Renekton's place, that all falls away, and now we get this much clearer air. Like, this much less looks like there's a sandstorm going on all the time. The light is brighter, the light is a little bit paler, and some of the colors are getting a little bit more saturated. So you get this transition, like this exhale of tension, where it's like, okay, he got away from the thing, he's looking home free, we're sure everything's gonna go fine, and then we see, oh wait, that looks like a crocodile foot, but it can stand on 2 legs, that's probably bad. We get the tease that the tension is about to ratchet back up. And you can see he is completely convinced that he's safe. He's like just tossing the thing around going, haha, I am so cool, I am an adventurer, Indiana Jones, eat your heart out, I am way cooler than you are. Uh-oh. Oh no. Oh, that's not good. Ba-boom! And as Renekton re-enters the scene, how does he re-enter the scene? Through a big, thick, sandy, yellow dust cloud. So we get a reassertion of the color grading that's dominant around Renekton's area when he comes into the scene and is at the heights of his powers. And I'm really interested in these silhouette shots because I suspect that these are traditional 2D animation. That's what they look like to me anyway. But I can't know for 100% sure that they didn't just take the 3D models and render them completely black and then put a little bit of a filter over top of it. It's not impossible. I don't think so. I think these are 2D animation, like traditional 2D animation. That's what they look like. But again, because this studio is so damn good at this, I can't be sure. Anyway, another flash frame. Zing! And some just lovely effects animation on the thing as the guy falls over. Fortunately, he didn't get cut in half, so that's good for him, I guess. I wonder what Renekton did hit then, if not actually carving the guy in half. But again, same thing we saw with like when the guy was falling down from above, using this anime effect of having the glint of the metal off the thing come first, and then this thing explodes into view with a literal shockwave, like it's flying at Mach 1 or something. And again, his expressiveness. Look at that face. Like, whoa. Very good. Like, it's such a good character. And then we get our first actual look at Renekton himself emerging from that same dust cloud. And he does the reptilian double blink, where like first he blinks with like his regular eyelids, and then he blinks with his second eyelids, which is something reptiles have, and that's just such a clever little detail that makes him look really animalistic. And this is just a really gorgeous character model. Like, look at this guy. Look at the scales, the way they interlock, and like there's this complexity of geometry to Renekton. Like, he has all these scales of varying sizes that are sort of look bloated, like very biological, like really like animalistic, and they kind of interact with the scaliness of his armor, like all these overlapping, interlocking lines that gives the armor this sense of natural extension from the character himself, which is something that I like this Renekton character design better than the one we have in regular League of Legends, frankly, because of that, because there is this continuity from where the armor is kind of expressing his natural scaliness anyway, which works really well. And again, look at that beard texture. Look at that hair and beard texture. Like, that's so well done to make the light play with that correctly and look really nice. In a way that sometimes like makes this guy almost look like a miniature. Like, sometimes I get this slight feeling that we're looking at miniatures through like a tilt-shifted perspective, which I think like it's occasionally a little distracting, but most of the time it's really cool. And again, lovely expressiveness on this character. Especially here. As he goes over the edge. Look at that face. Look at that expressiveness. Like, look how much the mouth is doing. How wide it gets. Like, the eyebrows are being used to push in, and like the whites of his eyes really just like heightening his desperation. You can see how much this guy, first of all, doesn't want to fall down, but second of all, also wants to get the damn thing. He's dedicated to getting a hold of the damn thing. And so is our big crocodile man with his lovely character model. He really wants the damn thing. The damn thing must be damn important. Surely. As we fall down. And remember what I said about the light. As we transition into this underworld scene, where we have landed in Nasus's library somehow, I don't know, all of a sudden the color grade changes. You can still see, for much of the scene as the guy is reorienting himself, figuring out where he is, what's going on, we still have the golden light, like the bright white light of the sun illuminating him. Like, when he's not under threat, when he's still sort of in control of the situation, trying to reorient himself, the bright light of the sun illuminates him. And then, didn't know Nasus had these servants. This is a lore thing that's a little bit confusing, where in the lore of League of Legends right now, as it stands, Nasus is pretty much like alone, and he's been wandering alone for like a thousand years, pretty much since the fall of Shurima. And he doesn't have anyone or anything. He's been kind of this bent over, hunched over, sort of emaciated traveler type character who's like barely beginning to refine his strength. But now, apparently, in the state of the lore, he has like ancient libraries guarded by death spirits or whatever. Which, okay, did he have those all along? Why was he wandering the desert? Okay, fine, deal with that later. Ancient Nasus library. Cool location, though. Again, still the golden light of the sun is there. He's not being, like, you can see that he's coming under threat as this blue-green light of Nasus's library begins to dominate, and the golden light of the sun slowly begins to fall away. And you can kind of see how, like, the sun disk that he's standing on, like this little circle of sunlight, it gets less and less. Like, the sun gets less and less power in the scene as the power of Nasus, as the power of the environment begins to rise. And then as Nasus himself steps out, no more sunlight. No more sunlight, only the light of the library and the light of Nasus's power, which is pink now, apparently. I support that fully. I just feel like I remember that it was blue and green once, but that was probably a good idea that they changed that, because those are the colors of the Shadow Isles traditionally, so... Anyway, bye-bye to the power of the sunlight, hello to the power of the light of Nasus. Which, again, is a really good way to show the sheer power of Nasus as a character, is that he immediately takes over the scene completely when he walks in. Like, he's powerful, he's dominant, he owns and controls this space, and this guy is a barely tolerated guest among their ranks. Again, Nasus is not an antagonist to this guy, but he's like, this ancient artifact, I shall take it to the Emperor, except, of course... he has a brother, and his brother is a dick. And again, flash frames. 2 flash frames, actually, which look fantastic. Like, look at that shit. That looks like it would look great on, like, an edgy black and white t-shirt, wouldn't it? Well, I am your monster, or whatever. Like, say something like stupid and edgy, that would be cool. As Renekton decides to disrespect books, and again, we get this lovely use of, like, this like, extreme field, depth of field thing, where you can see that Renekton is kind of distorted in the frame, like, with this part of his body that's closest to us is sort of being exaggerated, and his hand that's out front gets kind of lengthened, so you get this very long, stretched feeling of him, because, of course, Renekton, now that he has spotted his brother, he doesn't care about anything else anymore. He just wants to, well, he wants to murder his brother, as we get more beautiful, gorgeous flash frames, emphasizing the power of the hit as Nasus gets pushed back. And here again, you can really see the animated on 2's aesthetic being used with these characters. Gorgeous. And, like, just the fight between these guys. Actually, let's just let the fight play out, because the fight is fucking awesome. It's excellent. Like, just gorgeous. It's a fight that's long overdue, by the way. Like, these guys have been like, Nectar has been like, I must kill my brother. Nasus has been like, I must save my brother from his madness. For years and years and years, it's nice to see them finally get to actually duke it out. And also, you get the sense, just from looking at the fight, that, yeah, Nasus can hold his own, but Renekton is definitely the stronger fighter, because, again, that's what their characters are like. Nasus is a great tactician. Renekton is the guy who actually kicks ass in person most of the time. So, lots of use of effects, overlaid. Like, as Renekton moves his, whatever the hell that thing, freaking Klingon weapon, whatever it is, around, you can see that there's this golden light, like shiny golden sharp light that follows it. As Nasus throws his weight around, his power, we get this pink light. So you get this pink and gold contrast between the two that sort of marks out what their various powers look like. You can see that, like, that pink smear that follows along Nasus's weapon as he swings it. And also, look at the squash and look at the stretching of and the breaking of the character model here. As Nasus swings his big axe down, look at that. The handle of it actually curves, so you get this sense of, like, he's swinging it so fast that it's actually bending it, which gives greater power and, like, movement to the thing that he's doing. And then as Renekton grapples his brother, on the other hand, look at the flash of power. Boom. Renekton's power is symbolized here with this golden yellow light. That's sort of symbolized, like, that's when he does a thing that's powerful, when he does a thing that's strong. That's the light that follows it. Same again here, the smear on his weapon. And that's something that, like, in a chaotic scene like this, it can kind of help you keep track visually of who is doing what. Like, when, like, with the camera's panning around, big bodies are flying around and flailing, and there's a lot of chaos in the scene, having these little color codings, even though, again, consciously you're not sitting there ping attention, yes, here we see the yellow light, which means Renekton is doing a thing, and the pink light means Nasus is doing a thing. It just helps visually your brain keep track of where things are and what's happening, and who's doing what. And just, bonk, hit my microphone there. For my money, it just works really well. And again, flash frames as poor Nasus gets smacked into the ground there. Big important flash frame. And I do love the little detail that as he falls out of the light, like as he falls into shadow, you see the glow of his red eyes as he falls down. And again, all of this falling debris, all of this dust, and I think most of the rocks too, except maybe that one, I believe are 2D animated as well. And here we see the two brothers taking a tumble into God knows what. More books, probably, knowing Nasus. Lots of smearing. Lots of use of all the techniques that we've talked about so far already. And again, the light, all just bright blue, cold blue, all over the place, which provides us with a contrast. As you see, he dives into the portal, and we get this bright white bluish light dominating everything. And then he emerges on the other side. And now take a look at what the light has done. And also the colors. Take a look at the colors in these scenes. Because here, first of all, we're in the Seer's Temple now. Like, we're back at Azir's domain. He is the Lord of the Sun, essentially, right? So now the sunlight is there again, but unlike that bright, white, kind of sheer, pale sunlight that we saw in the previous scenes, this light is sumptuous and golden and saturated and feels really warm and kind of almost heavenly in its context. And all the colors of the scene, all of it, is way more saturated here. Like even the colors of the guy's cape and like his skin and his hair and the gold on his ear, like that saturation has been bumped up a real strong notch to really give this this sense of wealth and sumptuousness. And that persists as we head out into the sunlight here. It's still quite bright and pale, but you have this golden sheen all over, like this late in the day golden hour kind of sheen all over everything, and all the colors, like the armor. If you go back and compare what his armor looks like here in terms of saturation, it's way more saturated here. So like here we have entered into this scene of verdure and splendor and like wealth and richness as compared to the sparseness and the kind of harshness of the light and the color in the previous scenes. So again, like it's a subtle thing, but the light and just the sheer saturation of color, especially like that golden azure of the water that spills from the sun disk, is being used here to signify like just the nature of Azir's power, the power to bring life to the desert, as we see our first plants ever in the whole thing. Like, these are the first plants we have seen at all, the first little bit of green and the first watery blue. And that, again, it's all part of the storytelling of telling you what kind of kingdom is it that Azir is building here. Well, at its very best, it's a kingdom of plenty. It's a kingdom where there's lots of water. We've got cool places to hide in the sweltering desert. You've got plants, you've got verdure, you've got like fertility, and all the good stuff in the world. That's Azir's empire at its best, which of course is the empire that this man serves, so we're seeing it from his perspective in this case. Anyway, that's not about the animation. I think I'm done talking about, well, not done talking about the animation. I could go on forever, but I want to try and limit myself. If I can get this video down under an hour, wouldn't that be something? Anyway, if you have enjoyed this extended blabber about the animation in the Rise of the Ascended animated short for Legends of Runeterra, then you can hit the like, comment, and subscribe buttons down below. It's helpful. It makes number go up, which makes YouTube happy, which makes it show my videos to people, which I would like my videos to be people to shown. So see, can they subscribe channel do? And I can pay my rent, which hopefully also a good thing. I have a Patreon, I have a merchandise store, I have a tip jar. You can use them if you want to, but if you don't want to or you're not able to, please don't worry about it. At the end of my videos, I try to encourage people, generally speaking, to support content that they enjoy with direct contributions of however much they can, whenever they can. Because especially if you have a smaller or a niche content creator that you like, doing like a $1 donation can quite literally be the same as thousands of views on their videos, so your support makes much more of a difference than you might think. Anyway, I also have a second channel. Self-promotion, I hate doing it. I have a second channel. I do Let's Plays over there. We're playing through Hades. It's been my longest running series on that channel. Some Final Fantasy Tactics coming up at some point in the future. I've been playing a bit of Variety, Planet Zoo, Project Dyson, the Dyson Sphere Project, I think it's called, and a bunch of other games. Go subscribe to that if you want, and of course my Shorts channel as well. Also, anyway, enough self-promotion. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to wear a mask and wash your hands. When the vaccine comes, take it and get your parents to do the same, no matter what they've been reading on stupid Facebook pages. And try to act in solidarity where you can with those who are working to make the world a better place.